Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel. We've got two major hirings to talk about. Well, one major hiring to be more specific. The other one is just as important, another Dakota governor, and pretty much everything else has been completely eclipsed by just this one hiring alone that we will talk about. You already saw the title, you already saw the thumbnail, so you pretty much already know where I'm going with this. So before we get into this major hiring, I just want to touch up on this one that we will talk about, Doug Burgum, who's being tapped for a role as Secretary of Interior. If you don't know who he is, you're not alone. I don't know much about him either. I know he is, or rather was, the governor of North Dakota, which makes a lot of sense as to why I don't know who he is. It also makes sense as to why he was chosen as the one to head the DOI. North Dakota is pretty small and heavily forested, smaller and even more forested than its southern counterpart, South Dakota. But Burgum, despite not knowing much about him, actually surprised me when he was debating in the 2024 primary debates. So I'm not really necessarily shocked that he became a member of Trump's administration as the head of the Department of Interior. Overall, I actually do think he's a great pick, especially after watching him in the primary debates last year. I kind of sort of anticipated him to join the administration, but not necessarily this position. But it does make sense when you really think about it. And I do feel very optimistic that he is going to do very well in that role, heading the interior and the federal lands and heading all of our national parks, probably because his state is nothing but federal lands and national parks, knowing how small and sparsely populated it is. North Dakota, to be fair, is actually a very beautiful state, so, again, makes sense why he's tapped in for that role. All these forests and these national parks and whatnot. He doesn't necessarily have that big of a track record. Not many people know much about him, but again, I think he'll be great in the Trump administration, and I really like him a lot. Now, of course, the biggest one out of all of these has to be RFK Jr. Now, Trump officially confirmed this on his X account, putting out this long statement about hiring RFK Jr. I'm going to read that exact post here verbatim. This is actually on his official X account. So at first I thought that this wasn't real because I was like, okay, this sounds like this is too much to ask for. Lee Zeldin in EPA, Tom Homan as border czar, Tulsi Gabbard for Intel, Gates for AG. Those are already really great W's, right? So, you also got Hegseth in there for what it's worth and a few others. That's pretty good. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, Burgum has been chosen. But now it is official. RFK Jr. has been tapped to run Health and Human Services. Yes, you heard that right. So anyways, let me read this post verbatim and show it to you on screen. I am thrilled to announce Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the United States Secretary of Health and Human Services, HHS. For too long, Americans have been crushed by the industrial food complex and drug companies who have engaged in deception, misinformation, and disinformation when it comes to public health. The safety and health of all Americans is the most important role of any administration, and HHS will play a big role in helping ensure that everybody will be protected from harmful chemicals, pollutants, pesticides, pharmaceutical products, and food additives that have contributed to the overwhelming health crisis in this country. Mr. Kennedy will restore these agencies to the traditions of gold standard scientific research and beacons of transparency to end the chronic disease epidemic and to make America great and healthy again. This has absolutely crushed the minds of the left and the legacy media. They can't even comprehend it, essentially because they casted off RFK Jr. as, he's a Russian asset, he wants people to die, and stuff like that. He's not qualified to be a health expert, and he's a conspiracy theorist. He's not, though. Unpopular opinion, but I strongly support this move, actually. I think RFK Jr. is the right man for the job. Some of his ideas are more wonky and I strongly disagree with, but there are some of his ideas that are absolutely true. For example, have you ever guys watched the movie Food Inc.? I'm pretty sure, the vast majority of you guys have already heard of it or have seen, bits and pieces of it. But the whole main premise of Food Inc. is that it talks about the corporatization of the food industry. Now, ever since the food industry has become heavily corporatized, it's no secret that a lot of people in the world, especially in the United States, has gotten almost noticeably unhealthier than decades past. Like, me personally, I don't drink and or consume as much sugar as I used to 10 years ago. A decade ago, I used to love having soda almost all the time, or in my Florida lingo, we just call it Coke regardless of what brand it is. However, as I've gotten much older, I've gotten exposed to documentaries like Food Inc., Fed Up, Forks Over Knives, and all these others. Specifically around my freshman year, I've become more, I would say, responsible with regards to my health. Now, if you've watched Fed Up, the whole idea, and this is merely common sense, the best way to maintain a healthy lifestyle is to limit your fast food consumption and sugar intake. And it's not just with physical health, it's also mental as well. It's like, linked towards anxiety and depression and whatnot. And so normally, you're supposed to eat more greens and plants and red meats. However, that's where we run into another issue. This is where Food Inc. comes to play. Because you have a lot of these farms, have a lot of these places that either genetically modifies crops or they give their animals steroids and hormones so that way they look much bigger and they grow faster and ergo they can give you more products. And with genetically modified crops, specifically like, genetically modified wheat and corn, which is what the documentary talks about, you have these big companies like Monsanto back in the day, which has been acquired by another company called Bayer, which effectively does the same thing. So you have these companies like Bayer that would create these genetically modified seeds that are supposedly immune to like pesticides and like droughts. Because when you're a farmer, when you're growing crops, that is not necessarily the easiest thing to do if you want to grow your own food. Because if you want to grow like, large quantities of a certain crop, a lot of these plants tend to die very quickly or get affected by it because, let me mention another movie. Everyone should know what this movie is, A Bug's Life. You have all these bugs and specifically these grasshoppers that tend to get their food by destroying these crops, and they're considered the bad guys in the movie. And it's sort of like in real life. These grasshoppers are considered pests towards these crops, and they eat and destroy certain crops, and it fucks everything up. And the solution, what you would do, is you try to get rid of them with pesticides, and they do more harm than good, and they kill the plants or putting chemicals in them. So it's very hard to grow organic plants, and with Monsanto or Bayer, you can just get the seeds from them, and not only the grasshoppers die when they eat them, when they get sprayed by these pesticides, they survive, and they can even withstand droughts. The problem with genetically modified plants, not only they're less nutritious than other plants, they also contain very harmful chemicals from these pesticides because they don't get affected by them. And a lot of these pesticides contain literal carcinogens. In fact, in the EU, GMOs are actually banned because of these health reasons. RFK Jr. was one of the major voices after companies like Monsanto and Bayer. And he also spoke out against, our livestock like chickens, cows, and pigs being fed steroids and hormones so that way they can be much bigger or that way they can grow faster. So when you watch Food Inc., it's not just, genetically modified plants. It's also affecting like, animals too. There are studies that show that the steroids and the hormones that are fed to these animals that make them grow bigger or grow quicker, a lot of the chemicals, the steroids, and the hormones that they use on these animals are linked to a few cancers. Again, those are also banned in the EU. So with RFK Jr., going after companies like Monsanto, going after companies that put steroids and hormones in certain animals, I think this will end up being good news with him being in there as Secretary of HHS. Another big example that I will highlight is that he came out lately against the fluoridation of our water supply. I think that is just as important. Because, we've already have like these toothpastes and these mouthwashes that already have fluoride in them. So we're already getting enough of it in our teeth to, protect the enamel, whiten and strengthen the teeth in general. But if you overdo it, you'll end up getting fluorosis potentially. And you'll also end up with other health problems. I was always told that fluoride was good for your teeth, but not for you to ingest. RFK Jr. was seen saying, look, everyone is already using fluoride toothpaste anyway, and they already have rinses made with fluoride. They go to the dentist at least once a year. They get their fluoride treatment, the fluoride trade and whatnot. You don't need to put it in, the public water supply. So, of course, because he mentioned this, everyone was all up in arms and saying, oh my god, he's a conspiracy theorist. Well, just so we are aware, the government is not necessarily your friend on health issues. Never really has been. The only actual health advice that you should be getting is from real doctors. You'll probably, remember the time, when the FDA's food pyramid was, heavy on a lot of carbs. Well, the basis of any healthy diet is an entire loaf of white bread every single day. And on top of that, 11 bowls of cereal. Well, empty carbs, nothing but sugar basically when it's converted by your saliva. And it turned out that it wasn't such a good idea. The reason why the whole food pyramid was so carb heavy is that the United States at the time was producing a massive surplus of wheat, especially genetically modified wheat thanks to companies like Monsanto, like we discussed earlier, and it was already so much that we couldn't give it away, so we tried to absorb that. The food pyramid was used as a way to get people to buy more bread. It turned out that it wasn't a good idea. Not only it was a huge surplus of it, mainly due to the fact that a lot of it was genetically modified, and it was able to withstand pesticides and droughts, and was able to be grown more of, well, it turned out it wasn't necessarily a good idea. And the dentistry industry was actually benefiting from it because, it created more cavities. We grow a shit ton of corn, we grow a shit ton of wheat, and we've been growing less organic shit and focusing more on GMOs because it's much easier to maintain because, droughts happen, pesticides kill plants, and also with genetically modified corn and wheat, you can also utilize it to produce more of the product instead of relying on organics, which you can only produce a limited amount of. That's why organic foods are more expensive. I look back, throughout all these years, throughout human history, even going back to as far as, the Black Plague. When I first heard about this, I decided to, analyze sort of the health advice that was given back in some of these days. And, sometimes the advice makes sense. Hey, durians are actually good for you. It's a superfood. I agree. Durians are lovely. I like making smoothies out of them. Tastes like a vanilla shake with a hint of cream cheese in it. However, when you try to cut open a durian, the smell that occurs, and I live fairly close to the Everglades, so I know firsthand. Here's what I'm trying to explain. That smell that you experience when you're by the mangrove trees? Cutting open a durian almost reminds me of exactly that, of being right next to a mangrove tree combined with sewage. So it's not a pleasant smell, and it fucking sucks. But when you live close to swampland, you're pretty much used to it anyway. That's why I can get away with it. But the end result is something very delicious and arguably the most healthiest fruit in the world. So while I would agree with that advice, and in fact, it actually is good advice, you should definitely add durian to your diet despite the smell. On the flip side, you also have crazy health advice hey, you should take a drop of mercury for your cold. Use a Nux vomica. And the radium girls were also a big thing back in the day. This was around the time when radiation wasn't really fully understood. You can just take water-soluble radium salts like radium nitrate and radium carbonate, dissolve them in water, and there you go. You have glowing water. And supposedly, it was good for you. It can cure literally anything. And, it's also important. The concept with regards to medicine, science, technology, and whatnot is always, and as I keep saying in a lot of my videos, always dynamic, never static. There's always more research coming in. There's always, more things that we can understand about the world around us. Always dynamic, never static. I am thinking about making that into merch someday. And so what RFK Jr. actually is stressing with regards to health, in position that he would be on Health and Human Services, he is, at least for the most part, right. Because over time, things progress. Well, not necessarily progress, they just change. Remember the time McDonald's had to change their French fry recipe from beef tallow to sesame oil? Because beef tallow, they got a lot of saturated and unsaturated fats in them. And any kinds of fats, saturated or unsaturated, were correlated with heart attacks and strokes. We've realized now, of course, that some of the fats are actually good, like monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, which are the byproducts. not the cause. In fact, beef tallow and sesame oils don't really make a difference in terms of how healthy the fries are. Health and the guidelines keep changing over time. RFK Jr. seems to understand this. But obviously, the reason why people are freaking out about this pick is because RFK Jr. has been, at least for a couple of years now, since the pandemic, RFK Jr. has been rebuked by the health community and many politicians as being like, he's anti-vax, anti-science, he doesn't know what he's talking about, he talks out of his ass, he's inexperienced, he's essentially like the health version of Alex Jones. Oh my god, conspiracy theorist, he talks out of his ass. But despite, his wacky views on certain issues like vaccines, he's still right, at least on some counts. Now, am I a super fan of RFK Jr.? No, of course not. Is this like a perfect 100% 10 out of 10 A+ pick? Not at all. I would give this an 8 out of 10, a B+ pick. There are so many things in which I deeply disagree with him on. But, if you look at other things like the stuff that was talked about in Food Inc., I think he'll still be good in tackling some of these issues, and I still think he would be good in that role. It's definitely pissing the absolute shit off the left. I mean, if you haven't seen like the mental breakdowns yet, you gotta go and take a stroll across X. And, just look up RFK Jr. A lot of people are saying that it's going to be the end of the world. Like, not even like Tulsi or Gates have garnered these types of meltdowns that we're seeing. But, I'm actually pretty much optimistic about this one pick. Like, I fully agree with his stance on GMOs, his stance on the corporatization of the food industry, and his whole idea of, hey, we need to shut off the fluoride supply in the public water. All of these ideas would still save a ton of lives. But, from this pick to all the other picks that we've been seeing so far, across the board, you have improvement after improvement after improvement after improvement. Trump clearly knows what he's doing. He's been in the White House for 4 years. He knows who we can trust and who we can't trust. And now you're seeing he's got all these people helping him out make the right decisions, and he's going all out. He's literally bringing out the big guns. He's putting RFK Jr. in position. He's putting Matt Gaetz in position, Tulsi Gabbard, people like Pete Hegseth, Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk, people who he knows he can trust all around. And, me personally, I gotta say, these are all great selections. This is already getting so much better than 2016. And, we're not done yet. We don't know where Ron Paul is going to go. It does seem as if he's going to get some role where he also may have to go through the Senate confirmation. So maybe it's like, I don't know, Secretary of Agriculture is where he's going to be, FDA, who knows? Now we also have to look to the White House press secretary role. I think personally, either Laura Loomer, or since she already lost a Senate bid, I think Carrie Lake, which is more realistic than Loomer. Get Carrie Lake on board in some way. Laura Loomer or Carrie Lake. Either of them would be good for press secretary. They'll run rings around the journalists. It'd be a hilarious time. It would also end up creating a bunch of hilarious SNL skits in the process as well, so both sides win at the end. But either way, if he does that, then maybe Kash Patel will end up being FBI director, and Dan Bongino as Secret Service head. It's like, at that point, Carrie Lake, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, if you get all these people on board, at this point, it's almost like, who else do you really need in the cabinet? You can put in pretty much anybody else in there, and it's all set and ready to go. So, as you can see, he's building a team. Me personally, I think he's building a good team. RFK Jr. being the latest addition. So we still got plenty of positions that need to be filled. Again, make sure you are subscribed so that way you don't miss out who's been hired and who's not been hired. This mostly was talking about RFK Jr., since this is a pretty big deal. But again, still the tip of the iceberg. We still got some positions that need to be filled. We're going to be analyzing and going over every single pick that Trump has made in his cabinet. So make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you have those notifications on. Because again, with this cabinet being filled up, I'm your news guy. I keep you guys up to date with everything that I got. And again, I'd like to know your thoughts about RFK Jr. Is this a good pick? Is this a bad pick? Do you think this will improve the health of Americans? Do you think this is a bad choice? What do you agree with him on? What do you disagree with him on? What changes do you like to see made? Who do you think is going to be hired in the cabinet next? Again, I always like to pull a Philip DeFranco and end the conversation down to you, so let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to hit that like button down below, and if you're new around here, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the little notification bell. Be sure to follow me on all my social medias, links are in the description below. Share this video around with your friends, families, boyfriends, girlfriends, enemies, whomever. Definitely helps me out a lot, helps the video grow, and helps grow the channel if you were to share this video with whomever you know. So RFK Jr. is the latest major addition of this Trump administration. Again, we're going to be getting a lot more as Trump seems to be working really fast in filling up his cabinet. So again, this is why you subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell and set them to all and not personalized. I am your news guy. I'm here to keep you guys everything up to date, and I also provide a lot more updates on my Twitter/X. I will be linking that in a pinned comment down below if you want to get, more additional news and, other things that I don't necessarily talk about here on the channel. And it's also the best way for me to interact with you guys and for you guys to interact with me. So be sure to follow me on X. It's going to be on a pinned comment. You can also suggest me some news tips and video ideas on what to cover in a future video. So follow me there so you don't miss out. But anyways, guys, like, subscribe, ring notifications, and until then, take care, talk soon, and I'll see you guys in the next one. You're awesome.